to this symposium. My name is Matt Seeger. I'm Dean of the College of Fine Performing and Communication Arts. I'm a professor of communication in the Department of Communication, focusing on public relations and crisis. I'll try to keep my welcoming remarks really limited here so we can get to the main speakers as quickly as possible. The idea for this project really began several months ago after Detroit's bankruptcy was first announced. The bad news about Detroit had reached really what was the fever pitch. And I was having lunch with one of my former students, and she said to me, "You're a crisis communication guy. This is a crisis. Why aren't you doing something?" So that conversation sort of led to some other conversations, and eventually a working group called PRD. That group included Mary Kennedy, Mark Sorge, Jenny Omnes, Mara Campbell, Heather Moynihan, Lisa Valley-Smith, Dan Tanner, Christina Lovio-George, Matt Lockwood, and several others who I'm sure I'm forgetting. We've been planning this particular symposium for about 4 months, and we didn't really expect quite such a huge turnout. We were expecting maybe 50 people would be interested in this, but the RSVPs are probably closer to 150. So we have been delighted with the response that we have had. We hope that through this symposium we can begin to leverage the resources of the PR community to incite some positive conversations about Detroit in the future. We'll leave the history of Detroit to the history department. We'll focus on the communication issues, messages, audiences, and channel feedback that are relevant today and as we go forward. According to the survey questionnaire we circulated in advance, almost 90% of you have responded to a negative statement about Detroit. Rather than respond to negative statements, we hope to start some positive statements, some positive conversations. Our graphic design students developed buttons, which you hopefully picked up as you came in, which have some of those positive statements. Mine says, "Ask me about Detroit," because I want to start that conversation. I just don't want to respond to the negative messages about Detroit. Our sponsors, Quicken Loans and Weber Shandwick, provided really important financial support. Our friends at General Motors and Airfoil also provided financial support. And you can, Airfoil designed our Facebook page. Please go to PRD, like us. And PRSA, Detroit, John Osterberry provided important logistics support. Detroit Regional News Hub, Mark Sorge was also very helpful in providing that support. I also need to thank my staff, Nicole Johnson, Deirdre Turner, and Gary Sandrowski, who made me promise never to do anything like this again. We have a lot to accomplish today in a very short period of time, and I'm sure there'll be others joining us as we go forward. Restrooms are across the hall. We have a relatively tight agenda. There is one break in the agenda. Little housekeeping: when you exit the parking structure, if you were able to get in, you just swipe your credit card again to get out. It will not charge you the second time, but that's how you get out of the state, by swiping your credit card. I'd like to introduce our first two speakers. We're very fortunate today to have with us Alexis Wiley and Bill Nowling. Bill is the spokesperson for the Detroit Office of the Emergency Manager at Aurora, so he's really been in the thick of it. Bill and I have had some really fun conversations about some of the challenges that, from a communication perspective, we're facing. Bill is a graduate of the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, and he worked as a reporter for the Fargo, North Dakota Forum. Our second speaker this morning, Alexis Wiley, actually she'll start. Alexis Wiley is Director of Community Engagement and spokesperson for Mayor Mark Duggan. Alexis also has extensive TV newsroom experience, and she's a graduate of Northwestern University. So, Alexis.
Matt, thanks so much for inviting me. It's exciting to be here because, as many of you know, I recently made this transition over to this side just a few weeks ago. And it's been a pretty cool experience in terms of really getting a chance to see all of the work that's going into moving Detroit forward and being able to tell those stories of the people who are making a difference on every level. You'll find them in our neighborhoods, you find them in City Hall. And I think the key thing that I think is very important is how do we tell those stories? How do we share those stories with Detroit and beyond? because oftentimes the negative can really overwhelm the positive that's happening here and the positive people who, despite tremendous odds, keep moving and keep trying to make a real difference in their city. So I know for me, one of the big challenges is really getting out there and making sure that we are communicating all the things that is happening within the city, within City Hall, to address every aspect of life. And I'm here more really to learn from all of you and to see how we can all work together to really tell the true story about Detroit. I know that's a concern that's on every level of government. I mean, I'll wait to the governor's office. How do we get people to understand what's really happening here and to start to see Detroit a little differently? One thing, my background, I grew up in Los Angeles and went to Northwestern and such, and when I got here, I saw a very different city than what I'd been told I would see. I saw a city with amazing people. I saw a downtown that was actually a lot of fun. And in the few years that I've been here, almost 4 years now, I've seen so much of a change in our city. And my question is, how do we get Detroit to a point where people view it like, let's say, Chicago? For one, when you talk about Chicago, you can have a really balanced conversation about it. It's not just black and white. You can talk about how awesome downtown is. You can also talk about some of the problems in Chicago's neighborhoods, but at the same time, you don't write off the whole city because of one aspect of what's happening there, because you're also aware of a lot of the good and what makes it a cool place to be. And I think it would be great for us to get to that point. And I'd love to hear from all of you about how you think we can do that. So now, I'd like to introduce Bill, my buddy.
Thanks, Alexis. Matt, thanks for inviting me. I will say that if 90% of you say that you had to answer a negative call, then the other 10% are either lying or dead. Especially the last, I would say probably the last 2 years, 2-3 years to city control. I think, the one thing that I take away from where I'm at, and I'm kind of at the epicenter of all the things bad going on in the city as we try to fix them, is that it can be enormously stressful and demoralizing trying to find a way forward on this. And it's tough, and Matt and I have had a lot of conversations, and I was trying to argue with him one time that, it's really not, we're not in a crisis because a crisis is kind of defined by things that you can't control and things. And he said, "Oh, you're underwater. That's the definition of a crisis. Let's just start there." So that's true. I mean, we have to pull back and we have to look at this, and we have to kind of pull this apart. I mean, it is so easy right now to tell a bad story about Detroit, that the good stories get lost. And until we fix those issues, the biggest way to solve your PR issue is to fix the PR problem, and that's what we're really trying to do. We're getting a handle on the city's finances. We're getting a handle on the city structures. In some instances, for the first time in 60 years. That's not always pretty. I mean, there have been a lot of decisions, a lot of tough decisions that have been put off for a long time, and we're having to do those now in an accelerated fashion. So it's going to make that light even hotter that comes our way. It's going to make it easier for, as I like to say, the fly-in journalists to come in and do a story about what's wrong in Detroit or what's wrong in, whether you drive up Grand River, 2 blocks outside of downtown and you find, photo that's worthy of a front page across the world of what the blight is here. I mean, we're not going to change those type of coverage until we start addressing those underlying issues. We have to clear the blight. We have to get the city working again. We have to get the finances under control. That's going to take a lot of work. That's going to take a lot of pain. And that's going to take a lot of struggle to get to that point. But the one thing that I think is important that everyone in this room, and I was thinking about this as I was trying to not write a speech on what I was going to give today because I hate writing speeches anymore, but I bet there's at least 100,000 employees in this room that every one of us touch in one way or another, whether that's directly from the clients that you have who have employees, or if you work for GM, or you work for Ford, or you work for Quicken, you know, the employees that you have, or Blue Cross, you have the employees that you have here. When I look at where we need to really focus the effort is how do we maximize and leverage that network of people? Because those are the people that you touch and talk to every day. And if we can find a way to where we're messaging with those folks, then that will spread out from our network to their network, and then from their network to their network. Walmart did a study of its employees. They have 1.4 million employees. They did a survey, and they found that the average Walmart associate has 7 extemporaneous conversations about Walmart outside of work every week. When they found that out, they completely revamped their internal communications team to make those 1.4 million employees advocates for the company, empowering them with the information that they need to engage people about issues that affect Walmart, issues that affect their community. And that's what we need to do here. We have to figure out how do we engage those people closest to us so that we can talk about Detroit and Southeast Michigan in a positive way. There's a lot of things that are changing in the city. There's a lot of things that we don't want to necessarily talk about, but there's also a lot of good. And the more people that we can empower and provide that information for, the easier it's going to be to do that story. The easier it's going to be to take those negative calls that come in and turn them into opportunities to say, you know, I can't answer that question, but here are 3 people that I think you should talk to for your story. And here, let me help you connect them. That's what this group can do. I've started that with Matt. I can't take all of the calls that come in, and people want to come in and talk about, you know, artist projects and hipsters, and, you know, hipsters are very, they're very fashionable in Germany right now. I think I've got 6 or 7 calls. Specifically about doing hipster stories for different news organizations. So hipsters are very hot in Europe right now, and people are interested in Detroit. I mean, you can talk about the negative stories. Detroit is one of the biggest news stories going on right now. It's been going on certainly since we filed for bankruptcy and before. But it is a very topical news story, not only from a business standpoint, but also from a human interest standpoint, from a marketing standpoint. Everyone is looking at what happens in Detroit. What does that mean for other cities? And Chicago's next. Chicago has $18 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. Unfunded pension liabilities is the #1 reason why the city of Detroit is in bankruptcy right now. So it's going to move next to Chicago. What's going to happen to Chicago? Chicago is a little bit better because it has a better tax base than Detroit. But the issues that it's facing are the same. You know, and that's going to be the same in Los Angeles, and that's going to be the same in Philadelphia and Miami, Boston, and every major city across the country as they try to get a handle on legacy costs and trying to live within its means going forward. And that's the issue that we're focused on, trying to tell the story about bankruptcy. I get a lot of calls from reporters who really don't understand the bankruptcy process. And they talk about what a black eye that is for the city, and I said it's quite the opposite. I mean, it is an opportunity for hope, and it's an opportunity to see forward, because the biggest decision about bankruptcy is making the decision to go into bankruptcy. After you make that decision, there's an endpoint for bankruptcy. There's a plan in place, and if you look at where the city is today compared to where it was this time last year when the emergency manager came in and was appointed in the financial emergency, we have a plan going forward that's going to take the city out of bankruptcy. We put that on the table. It's a well thought out plan. It's a plan that's going to, direct the city for the next 10 years. It restructures its debt down to a manageable level that the city can withstand in order to be able to provide services. And it outlines how we're going to invest moderately in those services that have been neglected for so long. When's the last time we've been able to say that about Detroit? We're not going to fix it all in 18 months. What we can do is give a good balance sheet and and give the mayor and the city council, basically a clean bill of health. As I like to say, the job that we're doing is a lot like a cancer surgeon. We know we can cut the cancer out, we can push it back together, and we can push it off into the waiting room or into the recovery room. But after that, it's up to you to stop smoking and stop drinking and get exercise and lower your stress level. Otherwise, you're going to be right back where you started from. And that's where it is with Detroit. We can fix those financial issues, we can fix those balance sheet issues, but it's going to be up to the leaders and the business community, folks in this room, the voters, to decide, whether Detroit takes that opportunity, kind of fresh start and moves forward. But I think that there's a lot of positive stories, but it starts, one, I think, with being honest about how we got here and how we're going to get out of it. Once we start that, then I think we can have some good conversations with reporters and people that we talk to. And I think we've got some time for questions, and I certainly want to answer those the best that we can too. So thank you very much.
Bill, I'm the wrong person to talk about hipsters, so let's take just a couple of quick questions and then we'll move to our next speaker. Questions, observations? Yes.
I think you bring up an excellent point. I'd like you to expand on it a little bit. There's some credibility issues. For a long time, it's always been getting better. We've turned the corner. You just said it's been 6 decades that this downfall has been going on. That may be true. I understand finance. I agree with you. However, that's not the perception of the public that we're dealing with. Are you trying to educate the public as to who's to blame, or are you trying to educate the public about the potential to move forward? You almost undermine your own credibility when you make a statement like that. So we have credibility issues by telling stories that aren't exactly true or haven't been perceived to be true for a long time. Do you disagree?
No, I don't. I mean, if you talk to ordinary citizens in the city, they're going to say, people have been telling us this for years. And so we can't keep saying it's going to get better, but we have to start enumerating those instances where it is getting better. And I think I think we do have a credibility issue, and I think that's why it makes it so easy for fly-in journalists to come in and do a number on the city, because it's so, I mean, we deal with journalists every day. Easy, plays in newspapers. Reporters are overworked. Newsrooms are understaffed. They don't have the time to drill in and down to the information that's would really help them to do that. And it only takes you 3 minutes to go find a world-class photo on blight. That's what we're dealing with. So we can't sit here and say, oh, it's all going to get better and we're going to whitewash everything and it's going to be perfect. But what we can do is start saying, the city's working. That's the one thing that I talked to in the early stages of the bankruptcy. There's a big emphasis on the city's working. The police department is responding to calls. The fire department is responding to calls. We are doing the things that the city needs to do. That's why we filed bankruptcy, because our debt was getting in the way of the city being able to do that. So we start by those small things that we have a plan in place. We have a plan in place. We have a judge that hopefully is going to give his blessing to that plan at some point, in some form, and then that is going to be kind of the point that everyone agrees to that we work off of. That's going to be a positive for the city to do that. But I do agree, we have a credibility problem. That's why I think it's very important to start with these small truisms that we can point to, even if they seem insignificant. It's what we have, and we have to keep coming back to that again and again.
And I think we have to really communicate what we are doing, because for one, under the mayor, we're revamping every single aspect of how the city works, because that has to be done. We can't keep talking about what was or who did what. That's not about that. At this point, we've got to just move. So we are looking at every single thing that the city does, and there have been a lot of systems I'm realizing now that I'm within the city that have been broken for a long time, and people have accepted that that's just how it's done. But we're bringing a completely different approach to how we operate, because the mayor's his objective is to make it clear that one of the problems that we've seen in other cities who've gone back into bankruptcy is that yeah, you were able to clear up debt, but you didn't change the way the city fundamentally operated. For us, we've got to make that change within a short period of time. So everybody is honestly working 24/7 to change the way we do business. And I think to communicate to the world that we are changing the way things are done, I think we really have a moment to be an example of how you make it through bankruptcy and what happens after. Because everyone's going to have to do what we're doing right now.
Thank you very much.